August 1943. A German guard walks toward a wooden gymnastics horse in the prison yard. Inside, a man is curled in the dark, holding his breath. One cough, one sneeze, one heartbeat too loud, and he faces the firing squad by morning. The guard stops, looks down. 17 seconds pass. Then he walks away. He never checks inside. For 114 days, 3 British airmen dig a tunnel from inside that horse in broad daylight, 30 feet from armed guards, in the Nazis' most escape-proof prison. 40 tunnels had already been discovered here, with 0 successful escapes, ever. Then the ceiling collapses, and one man is buried alive while his friends keep doing gymnastics above him. Because stopping means everyone dies. The impossible part? All 3 made it home. 5 months later, 76 men tried escaping the same camp. Hitler had 50 of them executed. How did a gymnastics horse fool Nazi intelligence for 4 months? And why did 3 men survive when 50 were shot? December 1942. Flight Lieutenant Eric Williams arrives at Stalag Luft III. The RAF bomber pilot had been shot down over occupied Europe, captured and shipped to this fortress in Silesia. But every British officer knew the rule. Escape isn't optional. It's a military duty. The problem was the prison itself. Williams noticed the design immediately. The barracks didn't sit on the ground. They perched on wooden stilts 2 feet high, giving guards a clear sight line underneath every building. Tunnel entrance under your bunk? They'd spot it in hours. The soil was wrong too. Gray topsoil on the surface, but dig an inch deeper and vivid yellow sand appeared, so bright it practically glowed. Any disturbance would scream your location to anyone watching. Fellow prisoners filled in the rest during his first week. Seismic microphones ringed the entire perimeter, calibrated to detect scraping underground. Every tunnel attempt since the camp opened had failed. The commandant collected a hobby of personally congratulating each captured digger with mocking applause before sentencing them to weeks of solitary confinement. The message was clear. Tunneling out of Stalag Luft III was impossible. Most prisoners accepted this reality. They played cards, read whatever books the Red Cross sent, and waited for the war to end. Some men had been locked up for 3 years already. The psychological weight of captivity crushed ambition out of them. They stopped thinking about home. They stopped thinking about escape. But Eric Williams couldn't sleep. Night after night, the same problem cycling through his mind. How do you hide a tunnel entrance when guards can see every square inch of ground? Then, one spring morning, watching bored prisoners do calisthenics in the yard, Williams saw it. A large wooden vaulting horse sat near the perimeter fence, standard gymnastics equipment. Prisoners used it for exercise when the weather was decent. It was big enough to hide a man inside. The idea formed in seconds. What if they hollowed out the horse completely? What if they carried it to the exact same spot every day, close to the fence to minimize digging distance, and one man hid inside while others vaulted overhead? The hidden man could dig straight down through a hatch in the bottom of the horse. The rhythmic thumping of vaulters would mask any vibrations. When exercise ended, they'd carry the horse back with the digger still inside. The tunnel entrance would be covered, invisible, moved back to the barracks every night. The guards would never think to check a piece of gym equipment sitting in the middle of an open yard. It was insane. It was also the only escape method no one had ever attempted. Williams brought the plan to 2 men he trusted. Lieutenant Michael Codner, a steady British airman who didn't rattle easily, and Flight Lieutenant Oliver Philpott, the Canadian who coordinated escape operations for their hut. Philpott's first response was clear: that's suicide. His second response, after 30 seconds of thought: the Germans are ripping apart basements and latrines looking for tunnels. Nobody's checking the gymnastics equipment. The more they discussed it, the more it made a strange kind of sense. Hide in plain sight while making the cover mobile. But the risks were binary: total success or total failure. If the horse tipped over while a man was inside, the hidden digger and open shaft would spill out in front of armed guards. If any German decided to inspect the horse closely, game over. If the man inside coughed, sneezed, or shifted at the wrong moment, firing squad by sunrise. There was no partial escape or second chances. Williams looked at Codner and Philpott. Let's build a horse. First, though, they needed to solve an impossible engineering problem. The horse had to be large enough to conceal a grown man curled in a fetal position, plus his digging tools, plus bags of excavated sand. It also had to be light enough for 4 prisoners to carry across the yard without visibly straining. Because if the carriers grunted or struggled, guards would notice the extra weight. How do you construct something like that from scrap wood in a prison camp? And what happens when the first dig session unearths a problem none of them saw coming? July 1943. They built the horse from bed slats and Red Cross packing crates, trading cigarettes and chocolate for every nail and scrap of wood. The dimensions were calculated to the inch. Canvas and burlap draped over the frame, scuffed and dirtied to look like equipment that had been sitting in the yard for years. By the end of July, the horse was ready. First test run. Michael Codner volunteered to go inside first. Someone had to, and he wasn't the type to let others take risks he wouldn't take himself. He squeezed through a concealed panel and wedged himself into the cramped interior. Knees jammed against his chest, arms pinned to his sides. Total darkness. The air was already stale and hot. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Outside, 4 prisoners grabbed the carrying handles, 2 at each end, and lifted. The instant they did, Codner's weight nearly threw them off balance. One carrier grunted loudly before catching himself. A German guard 20 feet away glanced over. Williams, walking alongside, hissed through his teeth, "Easy, smile." They shuffled across the yard to the predetermined spot near the perimeter fence and lowered the horse gently onto the dirt. Guards saw exactly what they expected. POWs setting up for their daily gymnastics routine. Nothing unusual, nothing worth a second look. Williams launched the vaulting immediately. Prisoners ran toward the horse, planted their hands on top, swung their legs over, and landed with heavy thuds on the far side. Again and again and again. Some added theatrical stumbles and pratfalls, drawing chuckles from the bored guards. The constant impacts served a purpose beyond distraction. Every thump helped mask any vibrations from digging below. Inside the horse, Codner waited for the first vault, felt the structure shudder. That was his cue. In near total darkness, he slid open a concealed hatch in the bottom of the horse, revealing bare ground inches beneath him. Using a sharpened metal spoon and a bowl stolen from the mess hall, he began to dig. The soil was soft. Every scrape brought him closer to freedom. Above, muffled laughter and grunting filtered through the wood as his friends maintained the performance. For 11 minutes, everything worked perfectly. Then his bowl struck something hard. The soil color shifted from grayish-brown to bright canary yellow. The infamous Sagan sand, the same sand that had betrayed every tunnel attempt before. In one short digging session, Codner had already accumulated a visible pile of yellow earth. If he climbed out covered in it, guards would notice the color immediately. If he left it underground, it would clog the tunnel entrance and make future digging impossible. Their perfect plan had a fatal flaw. How do you dispose of several tons of bright yellow sand inside a prison camp without anyone seeing? They solved it with trouser bags, long fabric pouches sewn from old uniform material, suspended from waistbands by string, hidden inside their pant legs. After each digging session, the man in the horse filled these pouches with yellow sand. When the horse returned to the barracks, he walked stiffly to the camp's vegetable garden, pulled concealed release strings, and let the sand trickle slowly from his trouser legs into the furrows between plants. Accomplices immediately raked the yellow grains into the darker topsoil. Pounds at a time, the evidence disappeared into cabbage rows and potato beds. The vertical shaft took weeks. Once it dropped deep enough, about 5 feet, they began the horizontal tunnel toward the fence. This was where the real suffering started. Each digger had to lie flat on his stomach in a passage barely wider than his shoulders and claw forward with hand tools. Ventilation was almost non-existent. The air turned foul within minutes. Diggers passed out at the tunnel face and had to be dragged backward by their ankles, unconscious before they suffocated. To survive, they built a breathing system from scraps. Kit bags became bellows. Empty food tins, soldered together with fat rendered from their rations, formed an air pipeline stretching from the shaft to the tunnel face. They pumped fresh air through this contraption with each stroke of the bellows. They called the system the lung. It kept diggers conscious, barely. 30 minutes at the face was the maximum before headaches and blurred vision forced a retreat. One sweltering August afternoon, Williams was at the tunnel's end, scraping forward inch by inch, when he heard German voices directly overhead. 2 guards had stopped to talk, right next to the vaulting horse. Williams froze. His face was pressed against damp sand. His lungs were already burning from bad air. And now, 3 feet above his skull, enemy soldiers were chatting casually about their shift schedule. If they moved the horse even 6 inches, they'd discover the open shaft beneath it. Williams would be trapped underground with no exit. That means firing squad by morning, if they didn't shoot him on the spot. The conversation continued. 4 minutes, 5 minutes. Williams's vision started to sparkle from oxygen deprivation. Above ground, the vaulters had slowed their rhythm, uncertain what to do. Then, boot steps, fading. The guards wandered away. Williams exhaled so hard his whole body shook. The 3 of them, Williams, Codner, Philpott, had been treating escape as a sport, an intellectual contest against their captors, a puzzle to be solved with cleverness and nerve. Moments like this forced them to confront the reality. The Germans would execute them without hesitation. This wasn't a game. It never had been. By October, the tunnel stretched nearly 100 feet toward the fence. But the worst was still coming. What happens when the ceiling caves in on a man who's already 50 feet from safety? And how long can you keep vaulting and laughing while your best friend suffocates beneath your feet? October 1943, day 114. The tunnel needed only a few more feet to breach the perimeter. They were so close the diggers could almost taste the night air beyond the wire. Michael Codner was at the tunnel face, clawing forward through loose sand when the ceiling collapsed. It happened without warning. 1 second, Codner was scraping forward through loose sand. The next, a dull whoomp. Then the ceiling collapsed. Sand cascaded onto his shoulders, his back, even his head. The passage behind him caved in completely. Within seconds, Codner was pinned flat against the tunnel floor, 3 feet of earth pressing down on his body, fine grit forcing into his mouth and nose. The pressure on his chest made breathing impossible. He couldn't move his arms, couldn't turn his head, couldn't call for help. His mouth was full of sand. 50 feet of collapsed tunnel separated him from the shaft. 50 feet of intact tunnel stretched ahead toward freedom, but he would never reach it. He was going to die alone in the dark, suffocated by the same yellow sand that had defeated every escape attempt before him. Above ground, the vaulters felt the earth shift beneath their feet, a subtle sag, like the ground had hiccuped. One prisoner shot a panicked glance at Philpott, who was waiting to help carry the horse back. They both knew what that tremor meant, but guards were watching from the fence line. If the vaulters stopped, if they showed alarm, the Germans would investigate. They'd find the shaft. They'd find Codner, or his body. So they kept vaulting, kept laughing, kept performing their ridiculous circus routine while their friend was being crushed to death directly beneath them. Every jump, every theatrical stumble, every forced smile, all while imagining Codner's lungs filling with sand. The minutes stretched into agony. Underground, Codner refused to die. The collapse hadn't been total. A support board had wedged at an angle, creating a tiny air pocket near his face. A few cubic inches of breathable space, enough to stay conscious. He clawed at the sand with his elbows, one free hand scraping upward through the loose dirt. His muscles burned. His chest screamed for oxygen. Inch by inch, he wormed his way up through the debris. After what felt like hours, probably 5 minutes, he broke through into intact tunnel. Bleeding from scrapes across his back, gasping, barely able to move, Codner crawled backward toward the shaft and tapped the air pipe 3 times. The emergency signal. Above ground, the vaulting stopped instantly. Prisoners carried the horse back to the barracks under the pretense that exercise time was over. They yanked open the hidden hatch. Codner emerged covered in yellow sand, shaking so violently he couldn't stand. Williams nearly collapsed with relief, but the celebration lasted seconds. The tunnel was now impassable. Several feet of passage had caved in completely. After 114 days of digging, they were back to square one. That night, working in total darkness, they rebuilt the collapsed section, stole more bed slats, reinforced the ceiling with every scrap of wood they could find. A German guard noticed a suspiciously creaky bunk the next morning. The POWs claimed they'd burned the slats for firewood during a cold snap. The guard bought it, barely. 3 days later, the tunnel was ready again. Williams pushed a thin rod up through the final inches of soil to test the exit point and heard footsteps. Regular footsteps. Guard boots, pacing a patrol route directly over where they planned to emerge. After everything, 114 days, a cave-in, a near suffocation, tons of yellow sand smuggled out in trouser bags, their escape hatch sat right beneath a German sentry's path. They couldn't reroute the tunnel without weeks more digging. They couldn't wait. Every day increased the risk of discovery. They would have to crawl out of the ground directly under a guard's nose and pray he was looking the other way. The breakout was set for October 29th. Would they emerge at a German's feet? And if they made it out, how do 3 escaped prisoners survive hundreds of miles behind enemy lines with nothing but forged papers and a stolen compass? October 29th, 1943. New moon and fog so thick it swallowed the searchlight beams whole. The autumn chill bit through their thin prison uniforms, but none of them cared about the cold. This was the night they'd been building toward for 4 months. Perfect conditions, if anything about crawling out of a hole beneath a German patrol route could be called perfect. The plan used the wooden horse one final time. Right after the evening roll call, a team of loyalist prisoners carried the horse to its usual spot, with Williams and Philpott sealed inside. The guards barely glanced over. They'd watched this routine for nearly 4 months, just POWs tidying up their gymnastics equipment before lockdown. Nothing worth attention. Underground, Michael Kodner had been waiting since afternoon. 6 hours crouched in the dark, breathing stale tunnel air, counting the seconds until nightfall. When Williams and Philpott dropped through the shaft at 6 p.m., he nearly wept with relief. An accomplice above sealed the entrance and carried the empty horse back to the barracks, whistling casually. His job was done. 3 men squeezed past each other in the narrow passage. This was the moment 114 days of digging had built toward. Williams took the lead, crawling forward on his elbows through the damp tunnel. Kodner followed. Philpott brought up the rear. 30 yards of absolute darkness. The only sounds are their own ragged breathing and the scrape of elbows against sand. At the tunnel's end, Williams reached up and pushed. The soil gave way. Cold October air flooded in, the first fresh air he'd breathed in hours. He lifted his head above ground level, peered through the darkness, and froze. A German guard stood 8 feet away, rifle slung over his shoulder, walking the perimeter fence on his regular patrol. Williams was half out of the ground, hidden only by a scraggly bush and the thick fog. If the guard turned around, if he shined a flashlight in this direction, if Williams so much as exhaled too loudly, it was over. Bullets or a firing squad, no third option. The guard's boots crunched closer, 5 feet away. Williams could hear the man's breathing, could smell cigarette smoke on his uniform. 3 feet. The boots stopped, then turned. The sentry rounded the corner, continuing his loop, footsteps fading into the fog. Williams pulled himself out of the hole, rolled into the underbrush, and waved to Kodner below. One by one, 3 shadows emerged from the earth beyond the wire. No alarms, gunshots, or shouts. They'd done it. The escape-proof camp had just been beaten by a hollow gymnastics horse and 114 days of suicidal patience. They split up immediately. 3 military-age men traveling together would attract suspicion. Oliver Philpott went alone, disguised as a Norwegian margarine salesman, carrying forged identity papers and a small suitcase packed with civilian clothes. He'd memorized his cover story down to the smallest detail, the name of his fictional company, the towns he'd supposedly visited, even a few Norwegian phrases in case anyone tested him. Philpott caught a train from nearby Saigon, sat calmly among German civilians, and didn't flinch when a Gestapo officer walked the aisle checking papers. His forged documents passed inspection. Several tense train rides later, he reached the port city of Danzig on the Baltic coast. Prowling the docks, he found a Swedish merchant vessel preparing to sail. In one of the most audacious moves of the entire escape, Philpott slipped aboard disguised as a dock worker and stowed away in a lifeboat. He survived 2 days on bread crusts and rainwater before revealing himself to an astonished Swedish crewman. On November 4th, 1943, Oliver Philpott walked into the British Embassy in Stockholm, Sweden, a free man. Williams and Kodner traveled together disguised as French foreign workers, greasy overalls, caps pulled low, speaking French when Germans were nearby to reinforce their cover. They moved west by foot and freight train, sleeping in barns, dodging checkpoints. In one town, a suspicious policeman nearly detained them. Kodner faked a violent coughing fit and they slipped away in the confusion. In Stettin, sympathetic French laborers hid them in a warehouse and connected them with a 19-year-old Danish sailor willing to risk his life for the Allied cause. This young Dane smuggled Williams and Kodner aboard a Copenhagen-bound ship, hiding them in the coal bunkers. By mid-November, all 3 escapees reunited in Stockholm, embraced by British diplomats. 3 attempts, 3 home runs, 0 captured, 0 killed. A perfect record that would never be matched. Back at Stalag Luft III, a German guard's boot broke through the tunnel exit on the night of October 29th. His flashlight revealed the truth. A shaft leading back under the wire into the camp. Alarms screamed across the compound. Floodlights blazed to life. The commandant ordered immediate head counts, but the remaining POWs stalled brilliantly, deliberately miscounting, shuffling positions, staging arguments. Hours of chaos. By the time the Germans confirmed 3 men missing, Williams, Kodner, and Philpott were already approaching the Baltic coast. The guards who had spent 4 months laughing at the British circus in the exercise yard realized they'd been fooled 114 times in a row. A prisoner later wrote that when the Germans understood the vaulting horse had been a tunnel entrance the entire time, their amusement evaporated completely. Their unbeatable prison had been beaten by a wooden box and a gymnastics routine. 5 months later, Stalag Luft III witnessed a far more ambitious escape. 76 men crawled out of 3 tunnels in what became known as the Great Escape. The result was catastrophic. 73 recaptured, 50 executed on Adolf Hitler's direct orders. It remains one of the worst massacres of POWs in the war. Sometimes the most insane plan is the safest plan. Williams, Kodner, and Philpott bet their lives on a gymnastics prop. 114 days of nerve-shredding patience, and the arrogance of guards who never thought to look inside a vaulting horse. They walked out of the most secure prison in Nazi Germany and made it all the way home. But if hiding inside a wooden horse sounds audacious, wait until you hear about the prisoners who escaped Auschwitz using Nazi uniforms.